Jeff Beck spent decades being called one of the greatest guitarists alive. The acclaim was real. So was the near-total privacy he kept around everything that wasn't the music. Toby Keith built a brand so large it could be hard to find the man underneath it. Suzanne Summers fought a very public war to control her own story, against networks, against Hollywood, against the way the industry wanted to define her. Steve Harwell was the face of Smash Mouth. What the stage gave him and what it cost him were two very different tallies. Richard Roundtree became Shaft, and for a generation, that image was total. He privately survived breast cancer for nearly 30 years before most people knew. Paul Rubens spent most of his life inside a character the whole world recognized. What that did to the person who wore it, he spent years quietly working out. The image is almost impossible to separate from the person now. A single name on a magazine cover, her own magazine, her own face, every single issue for years, and the world knows exactly who you mean. Oprah Winfrey became one of the most recognizable human beings on the planet, a brand built on warmth, on candor, on the idea that vulnerability is strength. But the image that feels so natural, so effortless, was assembled under enormous pressure over decades, at a cost that the audience sitting in those studio seats rarely had reason to calculate. Start not at the beginning, but at the moment the seams almost showed. It was 1988, and Oprah Winfrey had just dragged a wagon of fat onto a stage in Decatur, Georgia. 67 pounds of animal fat in a little red wagon, representing the weight she had lost on a liquid diet. The crowd went wild. The clip became one of the most replayed moments in daytime television history. She wore size 10 Calvin Kleins. She was, by every external measure, triumphant. Within months, the weight had returned. She has talked about that moment many times since, describing it not as a victory, but as one of her greatest mistakes. A public performance of a private struggle she had not actually resolved. The wagon became a symbol of how completely the machinery of television could transform a genuine human battle into entertainment, and how willingly even the person living that battle could participate in the transformation. That tension between what the camera captured and what it cost runs through almost everything Winfrey built. She was born in Kosciuszko, Mississippi, in January 1954, to an unmarried teenage mother. She grew up in poverty, first with her grandmother on a rural farm, later shuttled between her mother in Milwaukee and her father in Nashville. She has spoken in interviews about experiencing sexual abuse as a child at the hands of family members. She became pregnant at 14. The baby was born prematurely and did not survive. These are facts she chose to make public, on her own show, on her own terms, and the act of making them public was itself a kind of power move, one that she would repeat throughout her career, owning the story before anyone else could weaponize it. By 19, she was co-anchoring the news at a Nashville television station. By her early 20s, she had moved into morning talk in Baltimore, where she co-hosted a show called People Are Talking. When she arrived in Chicago in 1984 to host a struggling half-hour morning program called AM Chicago, the ratings were flat. Within a month, the show was gaining ground. Within a year, it was beating Phil Donahue in his own city. That was not a small thing. Donahue had essentially invented the modern talk format. Oprah walked into his territory and very quietly took it. The show was renamed The Oprah Winfrey Show in 1985. Syndication followed. By 1986, it was national. The same year, she appeared in The Color Purple, directed by Steven Spielberg, in the role of Sophia, a performance for which she received an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress. She had never acted professionally before. She has said Spielberg had to persuade her she was right for the part. The nomination announced, to anyone who hadn't been paying attention, that this was not simply a talk show host with good ratings. Something larger was forming. What formed over the next decade was a media apparatus with few precedents in American entertainment. The Oprah Winfrey Show ran for 25 seasons, ending in 2011. At its peak, it reached an estimated 48 million viewers a week in the United States alone, and aired in more than 140 countries. The show made Winfrey the first black female billionaire in history. Harpo Productions, the company she founded and named by reversing her own first name, produced not just her show, but films, television projects, and eventually an entire cable network. The scale of that achievement is real. So is what it required. People who have worked closely with Winfrey over the years describe a person of extraordinary discipline and focus, someone who reads voraciously, prepares obsessively, and holds very high standards for herself and everyone around her. The image of warmth and spontaneity that viewers received was built on meticulous preparation. The emotional openness that felt unrehearsed was in part a craft. That is not a criticism. It is, in many ways, the most impressive thing about her. The warmth was genuine, and the work behind it was immense. And she managed to make those two things look like one thing. But the cost of maintaining the image had its own texture. Weight became the most visible fault line between the public symbol and the private person. Winfrey has spoken about her relationship with food more openly than almost any public figure of her generation. She has described using food as comfort during childhood trauma. She has described the cycle of loss and regain that played out very publicly across 3 decades of television. In 2015, she purchased a roughly 10% stake in Weight Watchers, which she has since described as a company aligned with her own journey. The investment also made her wealthy in a new direction when the stock rose sharply after the announcement. The business decision and the personal narrative were, as they often were with Winfrey, inseparable. The same intertwining showed up in her relationship with her longtime partner, Stedman Graham. They have been together since the mid-1980s. He proposed in 1992. She has said they chose not to marry, partly because she believed the dynamic of the relationship would change if she became a wife in the traditional sense. She has been candid that her friendship with Gayle King is the most important relationship of her adult life, a statement she has made publicly, repeatedly, without apparent concern for what people make of it. She does not explain or defend it. That, too, is a form of control over the image, deciding which silences to keep and which to speak into. The professional partnership with King, the long collaboration with Dr. Phil McGraw that launched his own career from her platform, the relationship with Dr. Oz that did the same. Winfrey's ability to identify and elevate talent and to bind that talent to her brand was one of the structural engines of the Harpo Empire. It also generated its own complications. McGraw faced significant professional criticism over the years. Dr. Oz faced intense scrutiny from the medical community over health claims made on his television program. Winfrey, who had created the platforms that amplified both men, was drawn into those conversations. She addressed some of them directly. On others, she maintained distance. The lawsuit filed by Texas cattlemen in 1998 was a different kind of test. After a 1996 episode of her show discussed the risk of bovine spongiform encephalopathy, mad cow disease, in the American beef supply, cattle futures dropped sharply. A group of beef producers sued her under a Texas law prohibiting disparagement of perishable food products. She moved her entire production to Amarillo, Texas, for the duration of the trial, continuing to broadcast from there rather than requesting a delay. The jury found in her favor, but the fact that she relocated rather than pause, that she kept the machine running under legal siege, said something about both her resilience and the scale of the operation that depended on her continuing to appear. The 2.5 decades of the Oprah Winfrey Show contained enough specific moments to constitute their own separate histories. The episode where she gave away cars, the Bret Easton Ellis conversation, James Fry, the O magazine, the book club that genuinely moved publishing sales, the 2008 election cycle when her endorsement of Barack Obama prompted research suggesting it may have added over 1 million votes to his primary totals. That last one was studied by economists at the University of Maryland. Winfrey herself did not comment on the political analysis. She had endorsed a candidate she believed in and stood by that decision publicly. What the number meant about her cultural influence was left for others to calculate. The network she launched, OWN, the Oprah Winfrey Network, began broadcasting in January 2011. The same year, the Oprah Winfrey Show ended its run. The early years were difficult. Ratings were soft. There were reported tensions with the network's original co-chief executive, Christina Norman, who departed. Winfrey eventually took on the additional role of CEO herself. The network found firmer footing with scripted drama, particularly through a partnership with Tyler Perry, whose shows drew large audiences and stabilized the schedule. By 2018, Discovery Communications had increased its stake in OWN to the point of majority ownership. The network survived its early struggles and became a functioning enterprise. But the survival required Winfrey to step in, recalibrate, and absorb the uncertainty personally. Her philanthropic work is documented and substantial. The Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy for Girls, which opened in Henley-on-Klip, South Africa in 2007, was a project she financed personally and oversaw closely. She has said that Nelson Mandela encouraged her to build something in South Africa rather than simply donate money. The school opened. In 2007, a dorm matron was charged with abuse of students, a development that Winfrey addressed in a press conference, describing herself as devastated and vowing to investigate thoroughly. The situation was resolved through the legal process, and the school has continued operating. It is, by most accounts, a rigorous and well-resourced institution. The moment of crisis and the way she chose to confront it directly rather than through intermediaries was consistent with a pattern. Winfrey tends to meet hard things face forward rather than sideways. Her foray back into acting in 2013 in Lee Daniels' The Butler, in which she played Gloria Gaines, was widely praised. In 2018, her speech at the Golden Globe Awards, upon receiving the Cecil B. DeMille Award for Lifetime Achievement, ignited widespread speculation about a possible presidential run. The speculation was serious enough that polling was conducted. She addressed it directly in subsequent interviews. She would not be running. She has said she does not believe she has the temperament for political office. Whether or not that is the complete answer, it is the answer she gave. What the Golden Globe speech did accomplish was a reminder of something the years of television success had occasionally obscured. Oprah Winfrey is an exceptional public speaker. Not just effective, exceptional. The ability to hold an enormous room, to modulate between grief and call to action, to make a formal awards setting feel like a conversation, is a distinct skill from what she did in a talk show studio. Both abilities live in the same person. The speech also made visible to a younger audience that had grown up after the peak of her television dominance who she actually was when the setting demanded full register. She has been open about ongoing therapy. She has described it as essential to her functioning. She has discussed the ways in which childhood trauma shaped her relationship with approval, with control, with the need to be seen as exceptional. Those disclosures are not confessions in the traditional sense. They are, like so many of the personal revelations she has made over the years, calibrated. She decides what to share and when. The openness is real. The selectivity is also real. Both things are true. The image Oprah Winfrey built, empathetic, powerful, self-made, spiritually grounded, is accurate. It is not false. But it is also the output of an enormous and sustained effort, carried on across decades through legal battles and network failures and public struggles with her own body and private losses that the camera caught only partially. The woman behind the symbol worked very hard to make the symbol feel inevitable. That work is the part the camera never quite captured. She remains, at the time of this telling, one of the most influential media figures in the world, still working, still building, still navigating the distance between what the public sees and what it takes to show up that way, day after day, for longer than most people can imagine.